Hey, what's going on, guys? So, it's no secret that I am the world's biggest simp for the Ultimates by Mark Millar and Brian Hitch. It is, to this day, one of my favorite superhero comics, still one of my favorite Marvel comics, period. And I have an entire 3-part video series about the Ultimates, technically 9 if you count my Ultimate Spider-Man retrospective. And, I mean, that's a lot of content, and honestly, I'm probably not even through with it yet. I know I could talk way more about the Ultimate Universe, because it's a really cool concept, you know? It's a really cool cyberpunk reimagining of the classic 616 Marvel Universe. And I think in part 3 of my retrospective on the Ultimates, I said that the Ultimate Universe was basically Marvel Gear Solid. And I stand by that, because I think that's a really cool premise behind a superhero universe. That said, people who are very in tune with the history of comics and know way more about comics than I do, to the point where I feel like a fucking tourist in my own bathroom, whether online or in person at my little comic book store, I've always heard people make comparisons between the Ultimate Universe and Jim Lee's Wildstorm, particularly the Ultimates and the Authority by Warren Ellis and Brian Hitch, coincidentally both being major architects of the original Ultimate Universe. In fact, I've straight up been told that the Ultimate Universe does not exist without the Authority or the Wildstorm universe as a whole. And the Authority is a book that I've long since read, which honestly didn't do much for me first time around. You know, I thought it was fine. I definitely recognized Brian Hitch's cinematic visual storytelling in the way that he organized his panel layouts and the way characters were designed to be very movie friendly. So I definitely recognized that and appreciated it in like a historical context kind of a way. And I did see the influence overall with the whole, it's superheroes, but like in the real world, like that kind of tone that the book had. But again, I wasn't really feeling it initially. That was a book that definitely took me some time to really get into. But I also read The Wildstorm, which was like Warren Ellis and John Davis Hunt's, for lack of a better term, Ultimate Universe style reimagining of the Wildstorm universe, and I thought that was pretty cool. I also liked Waller vs. Wildstorm initially when it first came out, and I did read Planetary by Ellis and the late great John Cassaday, which for all intents and purposes was the Wildstorm universe's Fantastic Four, and to be honest, I actually really enjoyed that way more than the Authority. So I did end up exposing myself to a bunch of the Wildstorm universe comics and stories, and for the most part, I thought they were pretty cool. But I remember having a conversation with a buddy of mine who was like, look though, if you like the Ultimate Universe and you've read The Authority, you gotta read Stormwatch by Warren Ellis and Tom Rainey. It's the precursor to The Authority, and even more so, you see how it lays the foundation for comics like The Ultimates. And that was a few years ago at this point. Cut to last month, or as I'm recording this last month, I was on vacation with my family and I visited Graham Cracker Comics up in Chicago. They had the entirety of the Warren Ellis run on Stormwatch for like dirt cheap, including a weird, random, very out of print crossover between the Wildcats and Alien, which is not only canon, but instrumental to the massive status quo shift in the Wildstorm universe that sets up the Authority. So when I got the chance, I just sat down and read all 5 volumes of Stormwatch, and then I reread The Authority, and I also reread Planetary.
I tell you what though, folks, that's bloody nice. That is really... That is bloody lovely.
Okay, so getting right into it, Stormwatch is one of those superhero comics that's not really a superhero comic. It's more like a cyberpunk G.I. Joe comic that has superheroes in it. That's the best way that I can describe it. In a weird way, it's the grandfather of the MCU. It's the godfather of the Ultimate Marvel Universe, and whatever DC was attempting with the New 52, which I think they later perfected with the Young Justice animated series, and the unironic urban commandoification of Batman, and really everything that we recognize today as post 9/11 superheroes as soldiers, but like 4 to 5 years before 9/11. And that's sort of what makes this book so interesting. So in the Wildstorm universe, there is a sample size of humanity called seedlings. Basically, this universe is equivalent to mutants or metahumans. And the nations of the world are sick and tired of these glup-shitto-ass, superpowered genocidal maniacs and their bullshit. So the United Nations pulls their resources together, and they founded a superhuman crisis response team called Stormwatch, with superpowered super soldiers from every corner of the globe, and they operate out of a massive space station called Skywatch. It's kind of like the Justice League Watchtower, but, if it had security guards and staff and plumbers and that kind of thing. And the whole operation is run by Henry Bendix, codenamed the Weatherman. In essence, if Stormwatch is S.H.I.E.L.D. and Skywatch is the Helicarrier, or in the Ultimate Universe's case, the Triskelion, the Weatherman is Nick Fury. Or much rather, Henry Bendix is Nick Fury. The Weatherman is a title that you get when you're head of operations at Stormwatch, and as you see, there's actually multiple Weathermen throughout the series. Anyway, the core team as we're introduced to them is Winter, the team leader, basically a Russian Captain America with Gambit's power set, because of course. Hellstrike, an Irish cop made up of sentient gas. Fuji, another ball of sentient energy, but he pilots a mech suit and is apparently edging in every other panel. Fahrenheit, an American pyrokinetic. Flint, a Kenyan super soldier who's more or less a Rule 63 Luke Cage. Swift, a Tibetan speedster with giant bird wings. Synergy, a power activator for dormant seedlings. She's also an American. And finally, there's Jackson King, aka Battalion, a telekinetic who uses this, Iron Man type armor to amplify his abilities. And the book picks up with Stormwatch attending the funeral for a fallen comrade, who none of them really liked, by the way, and I'm sure he was a major character in the 36-issue run on Stormwatch that predates the Ellis relaunch. But here, I have no context for this guy, and I honestly don't really care for that matter. And I don't think you really need that context either. All you need to know is that a member of Stormwatch died in combat, and Stormwatch feels, on professional principle, pretty bad about it. But Henry Bendix takes this as a sign that he is not doing enough. In fact, he's been feeling that way already, but this just reaffirms his beliefs that he's not nearly doing enough as the Weatherman, he's not doing enough for Stormwatch, and he's not doing enough to save the world. But of course, in order to save the world, you first have to change it. And that's the core thesis of the entire series moving forward. Superheroes as proactive agents of change, as opposed to reactive defenders of the status quo. Which is a very interesting thesis to have in a superhero comic. Particularly one that presents superheroes as a paramilitary organization that's backed by the United Nations, an institution put in place basically with the sole purpose of preserving the status quo, regardless of how good or bad they are at actually carrying that out. And the book is at odds with itself in that regard, intentionally so. And this is where Warren Ellis and artist Tom Rainey introduced Jenny Sparks. By now, I'm pretty sure everyone knows who she is, for better or worse. Jenny Sparks is a 100-year-old, chain-smoking, retired superhero who doesn't exactly control electricity as much as she is electricity. Her whole thing is that she is the spirit of the 20th century, because the Earth will just manifest avatars of absolute concepts and forces of nature every century. So Jenny is electricity, and Henry Bendix needs her help to change the world to save humanity. And Jenny goes along for the ride, because Jenny's a fascinating character in that she has lived a life of disappointment, because at her core, she is a romantic who is in love with the concepts of truth and justice and a better tomorrow, but she's always looking for someone else to lead the way to a brighter future, and she just wants to ride along. But the men who have promised her this future in various stages of her life have always let her down, in that they always wind up being the exact thing that they swore they would fight against and protect the world from. In fact, one of my favorite issues, issue 47, goes into Jenny's history from the 1920s onward, and you get to see Tom Rainey draw her life story with each decade being themed after the comics that define that era. So the 1940s, she's basically Siegel and Schuster's Superman. In the 1940s, she's a pulp noir detective and everything's in black and white like Will Eisner's The Spirit. In the 1960s, she's on a team and everything is Jack Kirby inspired. And the 1980s is Dave Gibbons and Alan Moore's Watchmen. And it was really cool watching Jenny go from this jaded, perma-drunk, wasted has-been who's given up on life and the world to sobering up and taking it upon herself to be the change that she so desperately wanted to see in the world by the time you get to the Authority. And all in all, this comic is really good, it's really fun, and again, foundational to contemporary superhero comic book storytelling, with superheroes being played as theatrical paramilitary organizations and urban commandos. But what's so interesting is that by the time you get to the end of the series, the whole superheroes as soldiers thesis is proven to be fatally unsustainable. In fact, that's the entire point of the Authority. Superheroes can't stay beholden to the governments of the world or stay beholden to any nation's social-political status quo. In order for superheroes to truly be superheroes, they have to literally act on a higher authority, regardless of how horrifying that prospect is when you stop and think about it for more than 5 seconds. But also, the Authority just reads better after having read Stormwatch, and it makes the Authority significantly more sympathetic watching them go from being Black Ops, superpowered jackboots who are disillusioned with the world around them, to being genuine comic book superheroes dedicated to saving the world and helping as many people as they possibly can. Which, first of all, literally the entire plot of the Ultimates and Ultimates 2, it is very evident that Mark Millar and Brian Hitch ripped off elements of Stormwatch and the Authority for the Ultimates, so that's kind of funny. But also, speaking of Marvel, reading Stormwatch into the Authority, in a weird way, feels like the Marvel Universe morphing into the DC Universe. Because everything starts out very grounded and, very science fiction, and it's very much a world outside your window, which slowly escalates into this mythological realm of gods and monsters. And speaking of DC, I know I'm jumping around a lot, but speaking of DC, after having read an ungodly amount of Wildstorm comics, I, for the life of me, have no idea why nobody at DC can seem to make the Wildstorm universe characters work. It's very straightforward. Maybe not the Authority, because, that would be difficult to reconcile having a murderous Justice League analog existing in the same space as the actual Justice League. But Stormwatch could definitely work. Maybe not as, the British occult secret society that the New 52 was going for, but it can 100% work as DC's answer to S.H.I.E.L.D. And in my opinion, works way better as that than whatever they've been tripping over their dicks trying to accomplish with Argus for the past 15 or so years now. But, I don't know, man. It's just weird how nobody at DC, besides maybe Grant Morrison and Warren Ellis, and even then, I think those guys are pretty much retired from writing DC comics at this point. Nobody at DC really knows what to do with those characters. At worst, you're gonna get some incomprehensible bullshit. At best, you're gonna get something like Waller vs. Wildstorm. A pretty good comic, but a complete disservice to the legacy of the Wildstorm universe and those characters for the sake of fitting them into the DC universe and making DC characters look cool. Anyway, I can't recommend this highly enough. If you like superheroes, if you like science fiction, if you're really into stuff like Captain America, The Winter Soldier, both the movie or the comic by Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips, if you're really into stuff like Young Justice or The Ultimates, shit man, if you like Metal Gear Solid or even G.I. Joe, a lot of the modern iterations of G.I. Joe with the past 20 or 25 odd years specifically, Warren Ellis and Tom Rainey's Stormwatch is the comic for you. Because that's where I think a lot of that, superheroes as soldiers, that take on the genre, I think that's where this all starts. I think it starts with Stormwatch. And thankfully, DC just put out a compendium collecting Ellis and Rainey's run. It doesn't have the crossover between Alien and Wildcats, which is unfortunate. But, you can definitely find that on the internet somewhere. It's not that hard to find. But, yeah, no, you should definitely check out Stormwatch. It's great. And, happy reading. And until next time, take care, guys. Peace.
Charged up.